Thank you. The member for Heathcote has the final question for the year. Member for Heathcote.
My question is the Minister for Energy and the Environment. Get the Minister to update the House on the state of the environment and the power systems in New South Wales.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I sure can, but can I just start, Mr Speaker, by wishing you a very Merry Christmas. And thank you for your leadership of the House. In fact, we've all really enjoyed the way you've managed to extend question time by an hour every day with all these rulings. Mr Speaker, can I also thank the member for Heathcote for a great question, and I note that it's great to get a question from the member for Heathcote at this very busy time of year for him. After all, he is the centre of the South, and with late night shopping tonight, I hear he's got to get away early to fill his shift at Westfield Miranda. But Mr Speaker, I just want to take a moment to reflect on what's been a very busy and long year for all of us. In fact, it's been a year of milestones, Mr Speaker, and what a better way to start the year than the election of the state's first ever female Premier. The member for Hornsby, the most outstanding Premier that this state's ever had, Mr Speaker. And it's not just first on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, there's also some firsts on that side of the House. And Mr Speaker, the Labor Party has elected its first female Leader of the Opposition as well, and I'd like to congratulate the Leader of the Opposition, and she's become the third longest serving Labor leader since 2011. Since 2011, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, she sprint past Penny Sharp. Mr Speaker, she's also, last week, just passed the outstanding milestone.
Stop the clock, please. I know that the Minister doesn't want me to stop the clock, to extend things, but I think he might appreciate it. Minister for Camberton.
129, Mr Speaker.
Yeah, look, I'm going to give some latitude on this question being the last question Thursday.
You've given a lot of latitude that's been taken for granted.
As long as it's good humour, I'm going to give a lot of latitude. Thank you, Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm just acknowledging these milestones, and I want to say what a significant milestone it was that the Leader of the Opposition passed this week in passing memory loss Maroubra's long reign as the Leader of the Opposition of 137 days, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the only thing standing in her way between that and the goal of passing Luke Foley's leadership record is the member for Cogra. And wouldn't he be happy with this week's Daily Telegraph, today's Daily Telegraph? Merry Christmas, Mr Minns. We know your term's not coming too soon, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, but listen, there's been a big year.
Member for the Canberra rise on a point of order.
Thank you, Mrs.
What's the point of order?
Mr Speaker.
What's the point of order?
Mr Speaker, the question was about, it's 129. The question.
I just ruled on that. I've made it clear my position on this question. Minister,
with a bit of humour, but we haven't had the humour, Mr Speaker. I'm waiting for the. Bring back Robbo.
Mr Speaker, I've been digressing. It's been a big year for our power system, Mr Speaker, with this government delivering the Queensland and New South Wales interconnector. That's delivered an additional 190 additional megawatts into the capacity of New South Wales. That'll help us keep the lights on, that'll help us drive prices down in New South Wales. And that's what the coalition government's all about. Lower prices, reliable energy in New South Wales. We've also delivered the Emerging Energy Program in this state, which is about delivering cleaner, newer generation into New South Wales. And that's a great thing, Mr Speaker. But it's also been a big year for the environment, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, this year we've seen the collection of 2.6 billion containers in because of the return and earn scheme, Mr Speaker. That's 2.6 billion cans, bottles and containers that aren't going into our parks, aren't going to our waterways and aren't going into our beaches just in time for summer, Mr Speaker. So it's a great win for our environment. Another great program delivered by the coalition. Mr Speaker, in addition to that, we've also delivered an additional 65,000 hectares into our national park estate. This is a great win. In fact, we've delivered about the biggest new addition to our national park estate in about 10 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that includes the Mudawinji State Conservation Area. This is a huge win, not only for our environment, but also a huge win for our cultural heritage in Western New South Wales, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, another great thing for our environment is our Saving Our Species program. We've saved some of our most threatened and endangered species and returned them into their native environment in areas that haven't seen them for over a century, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're delivering for our environment. But Mr. Speaker, I'm not the only one passionate about our threatened species in New South Wales. In fact, you know who else shares my passion for protecting threatened species, Mr. Speaker? The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition. You know, she protected Cover-Up Kayla. And what's she doing today, Mr. Speaker? She won't fire Finn. She won't fire Finn, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
I know, again, 73, and I would think even this time, Mr. Speaker, we'd...
Yeah, I will just caution the minister, but I will caution the minister in relation to Standing Order 73. The member for Heathcote, what's your point?
Funny, not silly.
Quiet, please. I can't hear the member for Heathcote.
Let's find his Santa sack.
Yes.
2 minutes of fear.
I hesitate. I need to hear from the member for Hornsby and the minister whether he wants question time to be extended.
Absolutely, Mr.
You want it extended? You want question time extended?
Your question times are never long enough, Mr. Speaker. Mr.
This is
Speaker.
granted.
Well, it's a great ruling, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, she won't fire Finn. And how does she give the community confidence that there's nothing to see here? Not calling in ICAC, not calling in the Electoral Commission, not calling in the police, calling in that incorruptible institution, otherwise known as the Labor Party, to investigate these claims, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Groundhog Day, isn't it? Standing Order 73, Mr. Speaker.
I will just remind,
representation.
I'm listening intently,
Mr.
and
Speaker.
I'll ask the minister to continue, but I'll be very careful.
Mr. Speaker,
Thank you.
this could all be just one big giant understanding. I mean, we've all had imaginary friends when we were kids. The member for Kiama still has imaginary friends, but Mr. Speaker, they don't use them to stack their branches and undermine democracy, Mr. Speaker.
Just stop the clock, please. I can't even hear what's being said, member for Campbelltown, so
Well,
I can't
apart
read.
from he's talking about his imaginary friend John Barilaro, he's been totally irrelevant.
Thank you. I'll ask you to sit down. Minister, you've got just over
Mr.
a
Speaker,
minute.
there'd be a perfectly simple explanation for this. Old Milky was just running late to a few meetings, you know, him and everyone he'd ever met before. That's exactly what happened, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and there is, in sympathy to the member for Granville, there is a perfectly reasonable explanation. It'd be very hard to get real people to attend a branch meeting when the discourse is from Laurie Ferguson and Linda Volz, Mr. Speaker.
Sit down.
Maroubra has the call. I think they're welcoming you back.
My good friends. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all members, I ask you to invoke the mercy rule, please. This is not relevant, skillful or funny. It's what happens when you send a junior in to do a man's work.
Member from Maroubra, lovely to hear from you, and you're now on three calls.
A bit like his leadership in the opposition, Mr. Speaker. Wasn't that a spectacular failure? A spectacular failure insulting our immigrants, Mr. Speaker. Couldn't get across the facts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and running on his horrible record of his time on Maroubra Council, where he looked after the interests of Eddie O'Bean and Joe Trapani, Mr. Speaker. What a disgrace, Mr. Speaker. The reality is nothing has changed in Labor, and it's the same old Labor, Mr. Speaker. It's the same old Labor. She covered up, she wouldn't kick out Kayla, and she won't fire Finn, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Jodie Mackay owes her career to cover up Kayla and Julia Finn. She's her best friend, and that's why she won't move on them, Mr. Speaker. They are a rotten carcass. Nothing has changed in Labor, Mr. Speaker.